Welcome back to Insights. I'm joined by ACC Professor of Political Science, Tim Kuhnlein. And Tim, let's talk about over the past couple of weeks what we've been seeing, and a lot of that is regulation or deregulation. So let's go in deep detail about that.
Well, and tying in with our previous conversation, the question is, to what extent will Trump and the current administration be able to roll back this administrative state? And they've made some pretty strong statements, and there's been some pretty significant action. I guess, then we can look at how does that play out in comparison to previous administrations. Is there anything really different? Are we just in a tug of war here? And of course, when we look at the nature of the regulations, we get into the substantive stuff. There have been 90 executive orders issued thus far. I'm sorry, 90 regulations have been, or deregulations have been impacted, either delays, suspensions, or reversals thus far. There have been somewhere around, I think the statistic is a total of 15 executive orders in total. But when you look at what these are, just recently, over the last couple of weeks, we've seen relief provided for no reasonable measure to protect personal information and social security numbers on behalf of corporations like Verizon and AT&T, our cell phone carriers. They're no longer going to be required to take reasonable measures to protect that information. And in light of what just happened with Yahoo and the Russian hacking, that's quite frightening. I was the subject to that violation. And what we're doing here is deregulating. And Goldman Sachs and JP Morgan are no longer being punished for collecting extra money to cover the losses from certain high-risk trades that they were engaging in. The Social Security Administration data will no longer be used to block individuals with disability or mental health issues from buying handguns. Handlers will no longer be banned from using lead bullets on federal properties, federal lands. 17 automakers now are able to rescind their mileage standards. These are the types of actions that are being taken. And the question is who's benefiting and who's going to lose. Just a couple more that are really interesting. Reducing the scrutiny of marketing for prescription drugs and for unapproved uses by drug companies. Coal mining and oil gas exploration regulations are being scaled back. And when you think about the implications of the Deepwater Horizon incident, it's kind of disturbing to think about. We talked some weeks ago about financial advisors no longer having to look out for being required to look out for their clients' interests, but rather their own financial interests, along with Dodd-Frank being rolled back. And then CEO salaries are no longer required to, as they were under previous action, to provide comparative data regarding the average worker in their business. So we're seeing a massive movement. In the scheme of things, when you look at executive orders, it begs the question, where in the Constitution do presidents have that authority? We're only talking about, somewhere, like I said, around 15 so far. But if you consider that that's in the first month, that comes out, it projected out, if you keep at this pace, like 119 per year, and that is triple what Obama and Bush did in their administrations, roughly 280 on average between Bush and Barack Obama in executive orders.
And I want to talk about some of these executive orders that you just mentioned. As an average person, average worker in Michigan, what kind of these, or how are these a benefit to a regular person? So that's what I'm having trouble seeing.
Well, they definitely do not reflect the interests of consumers. What they are doing is freeing up the industries to be unburdened by what many might consider minor technicalities, safety nets, things of that sort, that could translate into costs for the company, therefore reduction of profit and profit shares, but ultimately are not really helping the consumer and the protection of the consumer. The administration has made it very clear, and understandably so, that a lot of regulations that are on the books in many respects aren't even enforced. That's what we had the problem with the Deepwater Horizon situation. When you've got the corporate interests now embedded in the government and actually responsible for enforcing the regulations, but they don't bother to, then you end up in these situations. There are a lot of regulations that could probably be streamlined or removed. Trump has said he wants 2 regulations removed for every 1 regulation. I think we can all accept that over-regulation stifles the economy no different than a monopoly does within the private sector. Government needs to be responsible, government needs to streamline itself. But if we go so far as to start chipping away at regulations that were put in place for a very specific reason to protect larger interests like consumers, we have to look at the detail here and understand the qualitative nature of what we're doing.
And like you said, over history, throughout the years, we've given more power to the executive office, and even recently, Bush had power, and then President Obama had more power than him, and now we're seeing it again in the executive office.
Definitely. I mean, when you look back at the history of executive orders, you get back into the Founding Fathers, it was very rarely used. There was no concept of executive orders or executive privileges. In fact, our founders were terrified of executive power. They realized the reality of the need for someone to faithfully execute the laws, not decide that they don't want to enforce something because they don't like it, or they feel that the American people don't like it. It's law. You're expected to enforce it. You take a constitutional oath to do that. Now, if there's a problem, we need to get the laws corrected, right? But what we've turned into is a regulatory state in the sense that we've allowed the executive branch in many respects to create some of this pseudo legislation. Most of it is not pseudo legislation. It is legislation or acts of Congress that the executive branch is expected to execute. But when we compare, Franklin Delano Roosevelt clearly was the president that exerted the most influence. The idea of the imperial presidency really starts with this Roosevelt as well as Theodore Roosevelt, a distant cousin preceding. But Theodore Roosevelt issued just over 1,000 executive orders. Franklin Delano Roosevelt, almost 4,000, the most of any one president. That comes out to about 307 executive orders per year. But obviously we were dealing with a national crisis, the Depression and the Second World War. Since then, as I mentioned, we've had presidents, for example, George W. Issued 291, that's about 36 a year. Barack Obama, 276 total executive orders, it's about 34, almost 35 per year. Bill Clinton, 364 executive orders, about 45 per year. So again, if we stay on this trajectory of 15 in the first month, begging the question of the nature of these, we're talking a potential 119 per year. Almost triple what we've seen in the last, at least the last 3 presidents, both Democratic and Republican.
All right, well, we're going to continue this conversation. We're going to take another quick break, so stay tuned because there's more insights coming up.